That was awesome. How you feeling?
Last time on Hoot Gibson's Hangar, Hoot described going through the now internationally famous Navy Fighter Weapons School, better known as Top Gun.
Oh, golly, yes. It was quite a bit different. Some of it was similar to what they showed in the movie. But there were, back in those days, we're talking 1972, the women were not as integrated into everything as they are nowadays, of course. So I don't believe there were any women at all at Top Gun. However, there was nobody that looked anything like Kelly McGillis there.
We called that episode The Real Top Gun. But the two iconic movies that featured the school as a backdrop, 1986's Top Gun and 2022's Top Gun Maverick, required singular flying as well. Top Gun aerial scenes were accomplished using a modified Learjet flown by legendary pilot Clay Lacy and cameras mounted on F-14s. Much of the dogfighting was shot at Naval Air Station Fallon in Nevada. Top Gun Maverick, released 36 years later, showcased incredible leaps forward that had been made in both aviation and movie making. Top Gun's F-14 Tomcats gave way to F-18 Hornets, mounted with multiple cameras, flown by real naval aviators, often with the movie's actors on board. To put the viewer on board, IMAX quality cameras were mounted in the cockpit of an F-18. The support of the United States Navy throughout the production of Top Gun Maverick added immeasurably to making it one of the greatest aviation films of all time. In this episode of Hoot Gibson's Hangar, Hoot has an in-depth conversation with the Navy F-18 pilot who did some of the heaviest lifting in the making of Top Gun Maverick. Republic P-47 Thunderbolt was the largest and heaviest single-engine airfighter flown by any nation during the Second World War. At nearly 8,000 pounds, it was less agile than Spitfires and P-51s, and it didn't do well in low-altitude dogfights. But it could outdive any other fighter, and it could take an amazing amount of damage and continue to fly. And its 850 caliber machine guns gave it more lethal firepower than any other Allied fighter except the P-61 Black Widow. The P-47 could carry up to 1,000 pounds in bombs and could mount rockets under its wings for use against targets on the ground. It was powered by the largest radial engine available, the same 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney that powered the F-4U Corsair and the F-6F Hellcat. Americans produced more than 15,000 P-47s, more than any other American fighter plane in any war. P-47s first arrived in Europe in late 1943, and once the bugs were out, it became the primary fighter bomber of the U.S. Army Air Forces. Its range was steadily increased until it could escort 8 Air Force bombers all the way to Germany and back, and it could hold its own against any German fighter. Cruising in sweeps at very high altitude, P-47 pilots would attack at steep, high-speed dives and then use its momentum to climb back to altitude. Between D-Day and the end of the war, P-47s destroyed more than 7,000 enemy aircraft, more than half of them in air-to-air combat. But the P-47's greatest role was ground attack. With its diving speed, massive firepower, and ability to absorb hits and keep flying, it was probably the best ground attack aircraft in the U.S. arsenal, destroying thousands of locomotives, railway cars, armored vehicles, and aircraft on the ground. In Europe, the P-47 earned fame from its success. In the Pacific, it isn't as well known. At first, pilots in the Pacific theater were not as enthusiastic about the big heavy airplane. They said it didn't have enough range for long overwater flights, and it was too clumsy to compete with Japanese fighters in a dogfight. The first P-47s to reach the Pacific theater were the newly created 348th Fighter Group deployed to Australia and New Guinea. One of the pilots in that group was Bill Dunham, a 22-year-old from Tacoma, Washington. He named his P-47 Bonnie after his fiancée. Dunham would later command the 348th Fighter Group and would end the war as a high-scoring ace with 16 aerial victories. But Dunham's fame came not from his kills, but from an act of mercy. By December 1944, Dunham had reached the rank of major, was commanding the newly created 460th Fighter Squadron, and was already a double ace with 10 aerial victories. On December 7th, the third anniversary of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, Dunham's squadron was flying aerial cover for Allied landings on the Leyte in the Philippines. Dunham shot down 4 more Japanese fighter planes. One of the Japanese pilots bailed out. Dunham had heard the widespread story of Japanese fighter pilots shooting at defenseless Allied pilots in their parachutes, and he maneuvered to fire at the enemy pilot dangling in his parachute.
But as the enemy pilot came into Dunham's gun sight, something happened to Dunham that he later described as God's hand on his shoulder. He did not fire, and the Japanese pilot floated down and landed in the sea. As a final act of chivalry, Dunham made a low pass and threw his Mae West life jacket to the floating enemy. Dunham would score 2 more aerial victories during the war, his last and 16th in a P-51 Mustang, which he named Mrs. Bonnie for his wife. After the war, Dunham commanded fighter units in the Army Air Corps, the U.S. Air Force, and the Strategic Air Command in the United States, Vietnam, and Europe. He retired in 1970 with the rank of Brigadier General and died in 1990 at the age of 70. In 2005, aviation artist David Hammond learned of Dunham's act of mercy toward a defeated enemy, and he immortalized the incident in a painting called Uncommon Chivalry that was unveiled in the presence of Dunham's widow, Bonnie.
All right. Let's go, team. Sir? You're going to be sitting over there, sir. And the rest of you, okay. We'll go, yeah.
You're going to
Bruce,
sit here, right?
Yep, I'll sit there. Bruce, you're next.
Yep.
Okay. Margot and Shelley, you're next. Chuck, you're next. Bernie, I told you you're going to be the end.
I'll sit in there.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ed McElhenney. I'm going to be the moderator for this presentation we've got this afternoon. And just to let you know exactly what we're doing here, as I walk along, you're going to see the word history, heroes, and heritage. And that's what we're going to be talking about here this afternoon. We've got a beautiful airplane behind me. We're going to talk a lot about the airplane, but more importantly, we're going to talk about where it came from, its restoration, its acquisition, its performance, and we are quite honored today to have this cast in front of me, and they include, and I'll start at the beginning, Bruce Eames, the owner of the aircraft, and he's been here several times. He's brought, in fact, if you saw the program this morning on Thunderbird, another one of his tasks at hand, if you will.
Actually, that one's Warren Peaches.
Yeah, well, yeah, I understand, but it was you're part and parcel of it. It's the
Okay.
Aircorps Corporation, et cetera. And yeah, Warren's out here somewhere, I'm sure. Next, we've got 2 young ladies here who, and if you take a look, you can see on the side of the airplane, it's called Bonnie. Okay, and Bonnie, as you saw from the video, is named after Bill Dunham. And his wife, and what we are honored to have here today are his 2 daughters. We've got Shelley and we've got Margot, and so those are the 2 daughters. Then we've got our local expert. We got Chuck Cravens, and he's going to be our fact checker, and he has a wealth of information about the airplane. And then we just got the pilot down there, and we got Bernie again. Bernie Vasquez, he's the guy who flew this thing in, probably going to fly it out also, I suspect. Got a lot of time in these things, a tremendously high-time warbird pilot, and I thank you, Bernie, for being here and bringing us the airplane.
He always gets to do the fun stuff.
Yeah, he does. I agree completely. However, in our midst is also on the front row here, and I'll go with the Aircorps Corporation guys over here. We got Eric, and we'll be talking to them a little bit about the restoration of the airplane. But most importantly, I've got to bring up this this gentleman with a hat and the feather. His name is Jerry Tilden, and he had 66 missions in the European theater in P-47s. This man is one of the greatest generation. So, Jerry, thank you so much for being here. Take a look around. You got a standing ovation. And I should say he's going to be the real fact checker because he did it for real.
Yeah.
And we'll get to his stories later. But for right now, I'm going to start with Bruce. And Bruce is the guy who brought the airplane to us. He's the guy who sat there and said, hey, I want one of these. I like these airplanes. I want to restore one of these airplanes. And he's the guy who made it happen. Everybody knows what it is, P-47D, Razorback as they call it. Chuck, help me now. They built over 16,000 of these, is that right?
Well, 16,000 P-47s of all models.
Okay.
The D versions, there was something like 8,000, and about half of those were Razorbacks.
Okay.
This is the last Razorback model, the D-23.
Heaviest single-engine fighter that we used in World War II. We'll get more into details later. But for right now, I'm going to turn it over to Bruce and just say, okay, how did we get it? Where did it come from? And why did we get it?
Why? Well, the why is just, it's a long list of warbirds that I fantasized about ever since I was a kid. Like many of you, I had a father that was in World War II, and all my buddies growing up, they had dads that were in World War II, and so we built the models and dreamed about those planes. And with a lot of encouragement from Warren Peach of Dakota Territorial Air Museum, he encouraged me to develop an interest in P-47 Thunderbirds.
You want the real story?
And I'm sorry?
I didn't say
Oh,
that.
yeah.
I said, you want the real story? Warren made him do it.
Yeah, he made me do it.
Thank
But
you, Warren.
the thing that really attracted to me to it, besides very liking the plane, is that I like bringing the planes back. And I think that the P-47 was a plane that, in terms of my experience, was not really recognized as much as it should have been. And there were so few of them left. Very few of them really survived all the scrapping of planes after the end of the war and stuff, and especially the early models, the Razorbacks. And so when we decided to start looking for one, we heard of this one that had been pulled out of Papua New Guinea. And this one actually was found by a local who happened to be a Papua New Guinea Vietnam War vet, but that was living on a farm in Papua New Guinea. And he pulled this out of the bush and, ironically enough, cut the turbocharger out of it and hooked it up to a tractor engine and used it to melt nickel and copper for whatever he was doing, and was going to take the rest of the plane out, and was stopped by a bunch of other locals that were armed with machetes and guns, who said, you can't do this, you can't take this out of here. And a couple days later, it showed up on its nose as a gate guard at the local airport, and that's where it sat for quite a number of years until Rob Greinert out of New South Wales in Australia acquired it in 1998 and brought it to Australia. And from there, teaming up with Air Corps Aviation, we went over there and had an epic trip and visited the plane, and eventually packed it up in shipping containers in 2010. I think it was the fall of 2010. In 2011, then it came over to Air Corps Aviation shop up in Bemidji, Minnesota. Although I do remember that if anyone's seen pictures of what this thing looked like when we brought it and packed it up, I put my hand on Eric's shoulder when we were in Australia, and I said, are you sure we can build this plane back up out of this? And so along, yes, 11 years, 12 years later, here it is. And so it's a great tribute to Air Corps Aviation and their skill and commitment to bringing these planes back again. So thanks to those guys.
Thank you, Air Corps. Thank you, Air Corps.
So that's how it came into our hands. And at that point, as we started that process, the next thing was then turning to Air Corps Aviation's historian, their in-house historian, Chuck Cravens, to say, okay, what do we have here? What group what's the history of this plane and who flew it and et cetera, et cetera. And Chuck spent, close to 8 years doing a lot of tedious research in identifying the plane, and he can talk about this a little bit more, but it finally came down to that identifying what fighter group it had been in, and we got to the point where through his research it appeared that the plane had never been assigned to any one pilot, so that it seemed that it had been used in training and also as an extra plane when some other pilot's plane is off the line for repair. And so then we started looking at who were the pilots that possibly had flown it in training in that group or had used it as a backup. And of course, Bill Dunham's name comes up, and it's a story that just immediately resonated. This is definitely an incredible example of the kind of men that fought for us in World War II, and in particular that flew these planes, and that he probably did fly this plane in that squadron. And so that's why we decided to pursue the Bonnie livery and finish it off in an accurate restoration of his plane. And Chuck, you may have something to add to that.
Yeah, Chuck, you got the story that you hadn't met these ladies ever, and started to do some investigation, and they provided you with information.
I was connected, or I got the information from Terry Popovec, who wrote a really fine book about the 460th Squadron called Check 6. And he asked permission to give me Margot's contact information. And this was, 6 years ago, something like that? Anyway, she was generous enough to send some guy in Bemidji, Minnesota she'd never heard of before, his class book. And it wasn't just his class book, it was when they trained in Massachusetts to fly P-47s. He had written notes, his own handwriting, about every member of his squadron, what happened to him during the war, how many aerial victories they had, including Neil Kirby, who's the #1 Pacific P-47 ace. Bill Dunham is the second leading Pacific ace. Anyway, that's how we were connected. And the airplane, the biggest puzzle about it was abandoned on the eastern end of Papua New Guinea at a time when all the combat was on the western end, 1,500 miles away. So on September, I have information on May 8th, 1944, with a picture of the carrier it went across on at the dock at Townsville. Then no information until it was pushed aside on September 18th, 1944. But the location was always a puzzle until we realized, it probably was 35th Fighter Group because of timing. They were the first group to have them, and they had them in late June of 44. They then transferred their war-weary P-47s to the 348th Fighter Group right at the time where Margot's dad was assigned to start a 4th squadron, which is really unusual for a fighter group. That happened in July, and it happened about 150 miles from where the airplane was pushed aside. And so it's really the only squadron that makes sense. And so when you research this, you have to read the squadron histories of every squadron that had a P-47. But unfortunately, in the Pacific, supplies were short. Typewriter ribbons sometimes made the most important page that would really give you the answer completely illegible. So what makes sense is it was used as a trainer for the 460th at the time they got rid of it. And if that was the case, then it's likely that Bill Dunham probably flew it at one point or another. And it was at the time when this was pushed aside was actually before he got the 3rd Bonnie by about a month.
Yeah.
And he got 16 kills, is that right?
16 victories,
Okay.
15 in P-47s,
Okay.
and then I'm sure his daughters will tell the story better, but he went back to the States for a brief period and got married. Bonnie was his fiancée, Bonnie Harris, and then his P-51 was Mrs. Bonnie.
Yeah, I was going to say, the first Bonnie, he was just, and I'll address this to the daughters, Margot and Shelley. At first, Bonnie was a fiancée, is that right? And he still named the airplane Bonnie, but then, hey, came back after marrying Bonnie, and the next airplane was named Mrs. Bonnie, is that right?
Mrs. Bonnie.
Okay. And yeah, and I'll open it up now to Shelley Margot and just say, hey, go ahead, Bill.
Well, I've got one question. Was she anxious about when that plane's name was going to change from Bonnie to Mrs. Bonnie? Was there any question as to whether that was ever going to happen? Okay, all right.
Remember to hold up your mic.
Yep. But anyway, yeah, it's got to be an honor for you to see an airplane with your mom's name on it. And yeah, tell us a little bit about your dad. He went on to a distinguished career, retired as a brigadier general, as I remember. You two are both brats, and so you moved around a lot. And yeah, tell us a little bit about your dad.
Well, first of all, thank you. I mean, this is amazing, just absolutely amazing. He was just such a great guy. I mean, a great dad. He just made you feel good. He made you feel proud of yourself. He was so much fun. I remember drive-in movies when we were younger. We'd all four sit in the front seat with pillows and blankets, and miniature golf. We played miniature golf as a family. Every move we'd make, we'd have to find the miniature golf course. And bowling. He taught us to bowl. We bowled as a family. I remember when I was in junior high, we were living in England. We'd bowl for 25 cents a game at the base bowling alley. So it's hard to, compress it all in just a few things about Dad, because he was really, really something. I'll tell you a few personal things. I mean, he and Mom were a great example of a married couple, and fun things that I remember are she decorated a pair of underwear, put little bows and ribbons and hearts on them, and would tuck them into his suitcase every time he went TDY. So he could always expect to find those in there. Yeah. And they sent the same Christmas card, not sent, but gave the same Christmas card back and forth to each other for I don't know, 40 years. And I still have that. And each year they'd write a little something. So there's a little history each year of where we were, what was happening. And just fun traditions like that were a good example for Shelley and I.
Well, the one story about the one shoot down that he had, and Chuck can back me up on this one, but the fact that he shot down the airplane and watched the pilot bail out, and then I guess he flew over, watched him land in the water, and you can fill in the rest.
It's kind of interesting. It happened to be December 7th, 1944, so it's 3 years since Pearl Harbor to the day. And he shot down 4 airplanes that day. Yeah. And he saw, as the introduction said, he saw the pilot go down. And he had witnessed his friend and commander, Neil Kirby, get shot down. And it was by that time, it had been a year before, it was believed that he was shot in his parachute too, or else in hanging in the tree in his parachute. So he really had kind of motivation to shoot. And the Japanese had been documented to do that in some cases. But he stopped, and I think that's the important thing. And then he saw the guy floating in the ocean, far away from any Japanese help. And I don't know what motivated him exactly, but he made a low pass, which wasn't a real safe thing to do in a combat zone with enemy aircraft around, and tossed out his Mae West. And that's kind of the end of the story. We don't know really what happened afterwards, but
That gives you an indication of what kind of guy he was, though.
Exactly.
I mean, you know, a guy of integrity, of caring, and, you know, yeah, it's wartime, but, you know, yeah.
And as the movie showed, we'd much rather he be remembered for that act of mercy than, you know, being a triple ace. And I'm sure that's what he'd rather be remembered for, that kind of compassion and integrity.
Did he ever talk about that experience with you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he did talk about it, and he said that pilot probably had a little girl waiting for him as well, and a wife, and that was important. He was an incredibly compassionate man, and he honored all of his troops. He was a great leader. And he didn't feel, I had the stigma of the general's daughter, you know, that I was profiled. I had to live that down every time we moved. But he was my dad, you know. My friends were welcome, and it didn't take long for them just to feel like, you know, oh, he's a dad. And he loved to fly. He just loved to fly. And I always begged him, oh, couldn't you just put me in the cockpit? I'm real small. They won't know I'm there. But, of course, they couldn't do that. But he also had a philosophy that when he was trying to introduce something new to his men, or a new idea, or something maybe wasn't working real well, he said, this is pay attention to this, Shell, because this is a good philosophy of leadership. First, you suggest, you ask for their buy-in to maybe change something. And if it's not accepted and realized, then you try it again. And sometimes do it a third time. And if that doesn't work, then you have to order. You have to order the men to do it. But you always try the other first, you know. And he had a great sense of humor. We had a little dachshund that he adored. And they would play hide and seek every time he'd come home from work. First thing they did. And she was just a little miniature dachshund. She could always find him because she could smell him. Well, one day he got the idea to lie down in the tub. So here's this general in full uniform, hat included, hiding from this dog. and it took him the longest time to find him because, you know, and then I think he made some noise because he felt sorry for the dog. So then climbed in the bathtub, and they're having this reunion, you know. So that, of course, that's the first place the dog checked, but he didn't hide there again. He just was a wonderful, wonderful man, and I'm so proud to be here to represent him. And I thank you all for being here. Yeah.
One other indicator was, you said there was one award that he cherished more than anything else. And I can understand that, and I'll tell my story after you tell your story. But.
Yeah, he, when he was getting ready to come back, we were going to come back to the States from England. Something that was really honoring him was a going away party that the NCOs, all the NCOs in England got together and threw for him, which wasn't protocol. And that meant so much to him. And they gave him an honorary Chief Warrant Officer award. And he said, this is one of my most special honors that I ever received. So he was a colonel then. A colonel being awarded an honorary warrant officer was...
Yep. Yeah, I understand very well. When I retired, I was obviously a flyer for a long time, and then ended up in maintenance, got to know all the crew chiefs, all the maintainers very well, and worked my way up. And something I cherish more than anything else right now is the chief plaque that they gave me. They gave me a chief's bust, is what it is. And, you know, Chief Master Sergeant, it's the E9, it's the highest rank in the enlisted corps, and it's a beautiful bust of a Indian chief with a very nice plaque on the bottom of it, and I know exactly where he's coming from. So that gives you an indication who this guy was also. So thanks so much for being here, I'll say that right now, and allowing us, guys like this, to honor your dad.
Absolutely.
I think it's
Absolutely.
it's spectacular.
Yeah. Thank you.
How to grow delicious tomatoes. Step 1. Feed them while watering with Miracle Grow Liquid Feed. That's it. Miracle Grow. All you need to know to grow.
I want to talk a little bit about the restoration. There's two guys over there, Eric and Eric, who had a lot to do with it. And hey, give me the highs, the lows. It was 8 years or so. Is that about right? How many years did it take?
Well, like Bruce said, we had the airplane at our shop for several years. We worked hard on it since we finished the restoration of Lope's Hope, a P-51C model we restored. After that point, we worked hard on the P-47, and it's a huge, massive project. It's not a P-51, we can tell you that much. Lots of parts. There's over 40,000 parts in the P-47. That doesn't include the engine, the propeller, any of the instruments, and things like that. And we have an amazing team at Air Corps. Lots of parts, of course, were fabricated for the restoration, but many parts were reused from the original airplane.
That's what happens when you run late.
You can see some of the team up on the screen there, and we've added several since, and some people just have joined the team recently and got to experience the finish, and some of them been through the whole project, and it's really a monumental task restoring an airplane. Every rivet in the airplane, every piece has been disassembled, and it's just amazing and exciting to see the airplane fly again for the first time and help tell the story. And we all know when we fly the airplanes and bring them to places like this, we really get to tell more and hear more of the stories. So that's what it's all about.
I understand there's some signatures on it also. And can you talk to it, or should Chuck talk to it?
Yeah, maybe Chuck can mention some of the signatures, the details.
Through actually the same author that helped me connect with Margot, I connected with a general who was at the time 99, DeWitt Searles, and he had been with the 460th. He had, not immediately, but he ended up commanding the squadron about a month after Bill Dunham left the 460th Squadron. So I talked to him for several hours on he was magnanimous enough to take my call. And I said, I think Eric suggested that maybe he'd sign the access door. And so I asked him if he was willing, and we shipped it to him, and he signed it. Then we contacted another P-47 pilot that was still with us from Minnesota, and he signed it too. And then Huey Lang signed a different access panel, and there is a pilot step that comes from a P-47 that was shot down in Italy, and we helped Hans Waronka find. It was his uncle, right? And they excavated that airplane, and that pilot handle is part of this one. So there's 4 people that it honors, kind of besides Bill Dunham.
Wow.
Hans is here today, isn't he?
Huh? Yes, Hans is here someplace.
Yeah.
There he is. You can ask Hans questions at the end of the show.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about the airplane performance, and we've got an expert over there and an expert over here, and I'll just Bernie just goes like that. I'll talk to you first, Bernie. What do you think about you went through engine testing with it. You did your first flights with it. Good, bad, ugly. You know, any big problems? Fly as expected. Good performance, etc.
It was way more perfect than we would have ever expected. I've flown other P-47s, and I told this story a few times. Propeller, engine. This airplane's original. It's got a 50 spline propeller with the right nose case. A lot of the other airplanes have been modified. So they take a late model nose case, because you can't find some of the 50 spline propeller parts. There's none out there. Eric and his team sourced the Curtis Electric, but the guys want to run HEM standards for whatever reason. So they take a late model engine and bolt it on an early model engine. A couple things are different. The propeller's was not designed, that blade wasn't designed for the airplane. It might not be the right length. But the big thing is it doesn't turn as fast. Later airplanes, you turn the propeller slower, turn the engine RPM up, you get more brake horsepower, but it's slower to accelerate. So during the test flight, first flight, we briefed it all up. I'm going to get on the runway, hold 30 inches. Warren was behind me in a Mustang. Him and Ben came down. I said, tell me when to release the brakes. I'll run the power up to 45, and it's going to go down the runway, and it'll lumber off the ground at about 100, 110, and I'll put the gear up, which is really slow. They're really big cylinders, so it's a lot of hydraulic fluid moving, and a Mustang goes, we're all used to seeing whack, and it's done. This thing, it takes some time, and the whole time you're trying to accelerate, that's a lot of drag. So I briefed this whole thing up, and I totally lied. Because everything I said, none of it happened. I ran it to 30 inches. So these two things happened. I ran it to 30 inches. He said go. I went to 45, and it went, and I got the gear coming up, and I started a turn, and I told him we're going to be 500 feet, a quarter mile from the airport. We're going to drag this thing back around, and it's going to take 2 circles to get to 3,000 feet. I turned around and looked for him. I'm like, hey, are you going to catch me and look at this thing and make sure it's not leaking? And he said, I had Mito power on that thing. I couldn't catch you. And it just, up it went. So having all the original stuff helps. Yeah. It really does.
How about landing? You've landed a variety of these warbirds. Easy, hard, compared to, say, T6, P-51. In between, is it pretty docile?
Yes, it's a docile airplane. It's got a really wide gear, but the biggest thing is it's heavy, and you're landing really fast compared to what you are in a Mustang or a T6. And the heavier they get, the faster you have to land them. But it's just physics. So getting used to that, but handling characteristics on the ground are really, really nice. And maybe somebody can correct me, but I think this is the only Air Corps airplane to have a locking tail wheel. Is that, to my knowledge? I don't think any other of the Air Force-ish airplanes had locking tail wheels. So you lock it, and it's stuck going straight. It's real wide. It's long. So it's really stable on the ground.
Good. I'm interested in talking to our other pilot now, too. How about, what's your impression, Jerry, of flying that airplane? Was it easy? Was it hard? Did you really enjoy it? You had, 60-some missions in combat with the thing. I'm sure you had a lot more training, et cetera, et cetera. But what do you think of flying the airplane?
When you just graduated from flying school and they check you out at a P-40 in order to let you know how fast an airplane can really go, and then they put you in a P-47, it's a different world. But first, I think I might want to tell you how I got into the Air Force. I was 15 years old. I was living on Long Island, and a new newspaper came out, and they decided that in order to let the newspaper, which is Newsday, be successful, they assigned certain sections of the county to people to get subscriptions. So in a little area where I was located, I got the most subscriptions, and the winner was a prize. And the prize was a flight from Mitchell Field, Long Island, over New York City. Well, here we are. I'm flying over New York City, and I made a decision. From now on, I am going to be a pilot.
All right.
Right. Now I'll go on. I'm 18 years old, and I decided I'd join the Air Force because World War I is now in its first year. And I went down to the Naval Air Force Recruiting Agency because I could think of nothing more exciting than trying to land a plane on a boat that is bobbling up and down in the ocean. Well, I went to the Navy recruiter, gave him all of my information, and after about 15 minutes of discussion, he said, "I'm sorry, but we can't take you." I was heartbroken. So I went across the street to the Army Air Force. At that time, it wasn't the Air Force, it was the Army Service, whatever it was.
Army Air Corps, that's right.
Army Air Corps, right. And I went down and they interviewed me, and after the interview, the guy said, "Okay, now go on to the medical supply doctor and let him examine you." So I went into his office. He examined me and he said, "I'm terribly sorry, but we can't take you." I was so disappointed. I said, "Why?" He said, "When you were a kid, evidently you had your ears pierced several times and you could never take high altitude flying." Just at that time, a telephone rang and he had to leave the office. So I stood up and I looked on his desk and I saw the sheet of paper that had to be passed on to the next doctor. I took a pen and scribbled something where his name was supposed to be. I took it to the next doctor, and that's how I got into the Air Force. So I'll tell you about one of my experiences with a P-47. We were stationed in Pocatello, Idaho, and Pocatello, Idaho is rimmed by lava beds. Well, I took off on this baby, and I had two 500-pound bombs on the wings, and as I'm taking off and I get to be about 100 miles an hour, and I realize I'm never going to make it. So I pull the wheels as fast as I can, dump my bombs, and before I know it, bam! The plane hits the lava field. All of this time, I'm holding the nose up, thinking I'm going to make a nice, easy belly landing. I hit the ground so hard that the engine separated from the fuselage and traveled another 50 yards in front of me. And the only thing I could think of was, there's got to be a fire because all of that fuel is sitting under me. I jumped out of the airplane, looked aside, and the only thing I got out of that was a concussion. But 2 days later, I was flying again. So my experience with that baby was that it could take anything. Then there was you want to hear a couple of war stories?
One war story. We'll give you one war story, then we're going to do a walk around with Bernie.
Okay, one more war story. Okay. Put your hands on a knee, fold your thumb under your palm and make believe that those are the 4 50 caliber machine guns that are sitting in the wing. Okay, we're out flying, we're doing a strafing job, and we're coming off at about 130 miles an hour, and for some reason I look left, and there is a whole line of tracer bullets coming up to me. And tracer bullets, of course, are those things where you can see every bullet that's fired, and it's fired from a machine gun on the ground. This tracer line comes up, and it starts approaching my number 4 50 caliber machine gun casing, and about 4 inches away from the wing edge, it stops. Do you ever hear the story of the whole 9 yards? Well, when a machine gun armament is set up, the band is 9 yards longer, and those 9 yards are filled with whatever ammunition is used. 2 inches before hitting the leading edge of my plane, it rained out of 9 yards of firing, and that's one of the reasons that I'm here. Now, there were other things that happened to me, and one of the reasons was my crew chief, after I told him the story about this escapade, he named my plane Mr. Lucky. Believe it or not, I never saw a German airplane. The only thing we did was strafing and bombing. And in all the time I was in service flying these things, the plane never got hit with anything. So when they call me Mr. Lucky, all of my life, I'm known as Mr. Lucky.
Wow. I think we could listen to those stories for a long time.
Yeah, they will, I think.
But I'm going to ask Bernie to do
How you
just a
feeling?
quick walk around here and talk a little bit about the airplane, the hardware, so to speak. So Bernie, you got it.
Well, we've already talked about the propeller. One of the cool things about this particular propeller is it's hollow. So they're steel hollow blades. That's an external cuff. The intake houses a whole bunch of stuff. You've got air going all the way back to the turbocharger, around the turbocharger to cool it, through an intercooler that cools the air after the turbocharger compresses it, comes back up, goes into the engine, which is a Pratt & Whitney 2800. It has a blower in it as well. So it's got 2 blowers. Some of the Pratt & Whitney engines had a shifting capability, so you'd turn the blower slower down low. When you get to high altitude, you'd shift it, go to the granny high gear, and it would turn faster to compress more air. When they designed this airplane, just put a secondary blower back there, run off the exhaust. So you've also got 2 ducts for the oil coolers, which come out here.
What was the horsepower? Probably 2,300, something like that?
What's a 59W? 23, 24?
Okay.
Wet.
All right.
Yeah.
So 2,300 horsepower. Something
Yeah,
like that.
so one of the things about this engine as well, and one of the reasons they were able to do what they did with it, with the blower, was it has a gigantic, like 50, how big's the water tank? So 15, 20 gallons of what we call ADI. It's anti-detonation and injection, and what that is it's water and alcohol that they spray right into the intake that cools the charge. If the air going into the engine's too hot, it'll detonate. You only get a couple of those, and then the pistons start flying out, and it makes metal, and all kinds of bad stuff happens. So they had a button on the throttle that when they were going a really high boost, they turn that on, and it'd inject water right in there, and it'd cool it off. Well, then you had the air going through the intercooler, which an intercooler does the same thing, but it's taking air going through a radiator-looking device
to cool it,
and the air coming out of the compressor cools it. So it's an air-to-air deal. Here, most people think this is where the exhaust comes out, because in most airplanes, that is where the exhaust comes out. That's not where all of the exhaust comes out of this airplane. This actually moves, and it's a wastegate, so it'll close and port all the exhaust back to the turbo to make it spin faster to compress more. So when you're at high altitude, you take that boost lever, and it actually closes this off. But there's always exhaust going back there, so that turbo's always turning. And it's, well, one of the cool things about a P-47 is it's got 2 RPM gauges. One's in thousands, so when it's pointing to 10, it's 10,000 RPM. The other one's in hundreds, so the other one's engine speed. The other one that's in thousands it's actually got a deal on there to give you the RPM, and you can overspeed it. You can you have to set it, and that's basically, you got another little lever over here, like a mini throttle. So that was what was very unique about their design philosophy on that. The struts on this thing are pretty cool. They're 2 chambers. So as it sits here, there's 300 pounds of air on this side. But when the gear goes up, it has to collapse again to get in this hole. So there's a bar here that pushes a lever all inside the strut, and it pushes on a Schrader valve, and that air in here now transfers up here, and it equalizes it. So as the gear goes up, this thing gets shorter again, goes in here. However, if that fails and the gear pops back with full pressure, you're gonna belly land the airplane. It won't come out of the well.
Yeah.
Of course, we have the 4 machine guns that he spoke of, and apparently it stopped like right there, his whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
They did have the ability to carry tanks. We didn't put any of that stuff in this airplane. You know, they could carry a 500-pound bomb. They could center drop tank for more fuel. This airplane's pretty unique, where it has what we call a Christmas tree tank. So behind the bulletproof armor, there's an actual another tank that resembles a Christmas tree. That's why they call it that, and they stuff fuel in there too. So as he was talking about, you know, you're sitting on all this fuel. Well, this one, you're kind of surrounded by all the fuel.
And you were talking about, you know, the load. How much, I mean, could you carry, say, 2 500-pound bombs? I mean, it was more a strafer than anything else, but it still dropped bombs. And how many, you know, would you
they would put 1 on each wing.
Okay.
And then, or, you know, 1 underneath.
Okay.
I don't know that they ever carried any bombs underneath. I know they had tanks.
Right.
Did they have rockets too?
Okay, so they
yeah, so it had a belly tank. They could hang rockets on the wings, bombed in the center.
Okay.
Ailerons are really cool. This was something that I find fascinating because I like airplanes and I fly little aerobatic airplanes. But the aileron design, when it goes down, the air strikes it here. And I thought, like, they did that in the 80s. They thought that was a new thing. This was like 30 whatever. They already had the freeze aileron. So it's and one of the cool things about this airplane is when you're flying it, it's pretty light on the controls, but the further you go, the lighter it gets. You get to the last part of the throw here, and I think you could just let go of it and it just keep on rolling because it's got that deal. It's like a spade. So big giant flaps. It's heavy. It's, as they say, it's the heaviest airplane that they flew. So it's got big barn door flaps. Pretty cool design. They actually go out and then down, which increases the wing area. So it was ahead of its time by a lot. I mean, it was designed real early and used quite a bit.
Bernie, what kind of speed over the fence typically?
Typically, you're going to shoot 120 down final and then come over the fence at 115, 110. This is the intercooler door, so you close this if you don't need to cool the air. This is just cooling air for the intercooler, providing the air back to the engine. You'll see an oil spot. The turbo has its own oil supply, which is in behind the rear seat. There's a tank. It's got its own pump. So when you start it, it starts pumping and it's returning oil through it. Completely separate system, so you have to check 2 different oil systems on the airplane, which is pretty unique. All of this the shroud protects the turbo, and then all the other exhaust that's not coming out of the two little ports up front is coming out of here. And if you could see here, I don't know if you can get that camera up there, but there's a big ring with just a bunch of little vanes, and that's the turbine wheel that's turning the turbo. And then the rest of it's just big old giant airplane. One of the things about this particular airplane, and we spoke about it when we were talking about Thunderbird, having the high deck, the turtle deck, puts the air back together coming off of the canopy, and that's a huge amount of drag. There's a gigantic low pressure from that air going over the top of the canopy. So having this high back puts that back together, makes it more efficient, makes it faster. However, you got all these bars and stuff in your way to be able to see. So you can see why they went to the bubble style canopy on all the fighters to just give them the ability to be able to see the enemy.
Jerry, did you fly both? You flew both? Yeah, okay. That's what I thought.
I flew this thing in World War II, and I was recalled for the Korean War, and that's when I flew the bubble.
Okay. And
Did
what
you
was
have
your
it?
preference?
Did you have a preference?
Yeah.
Didn't make much difference, as long as it got up and down.
All right. Thank you for that. And I will now say questions. And I'll open the questions up for everybody here. So we've got, if you got owner questions, you got airplane performance questions, you got World War II questions, you got anything you want. And we've got some microphones out there, and I see all kinds of hands going up. So Bruce, you got one right there. Go ahead.
How come there's so many more P-51s than these aircraft now?
I bet Bruce could answer that question.
Well, that's a really good question, and I don't think I have a perfect answer to it, but I think that it just wasn't seen as valuable a plane as the Mustang, and so it got trashed along with a lot of the other ones. I mean, you remember seeing the pictures of P-40s just stacked up like cordwood with the engines off up on their noses and stuff. But Connie Boland shared a wonderful story with us this morning about from a gentleman that had been present right after the war when they were destroying the planes in the European theater, and that they were particularly destroying them with dynamite. And this guy said they'd put a stick of dynamite in each plane and just blow it up. And but with the as a testament to the sturdiness of these beasts, they would put 5 sticks of dynamite in, and whereas the ones that they'd put 1 stick in, they'd just blow up. The guy said, with the jug, they put 5 sticks of dynamite, and it would just go. So, you hear all the stories about how tough and sturdy these things were, coming back, just shot all to heck, or even the one with the guy that lost a wing and still brought it in. I thought that was actually the best testament I'd ever heard as to how built these were. Anyway, but I don't have a good story for it. Maybe you, Chuck, being the historian, would know why there's so few of these left.
They're expensive to operate, and Mustangs were taken over by a lot of foreign air forces and maintained and flew for a long time. And there's a type certificate for a Mustang that's a little easier to register than a P-47.
Well, and I think a lot of it had to do with the fame of the Mustang. It finished the war. Everybody puts the war on its shoulders, and it was what every little kid at the time saw flying over. It was my generation's F-16. It was a single seat fighter. It was pointing in the front, pointing in the back. And I think they were still active even after the war ended, so there's just a bunch of them there. Yeah. These things probably all ended up in the scrapper by the time they were surplus and stuff.
Yeah, I would agree. All right, next. Go ahead.
Does anybody know what happened to the Japanese pilot who got thrown in the Mae West?
We don't.
No. Sorry.
That would make a great story.
All right, we got a question over here on the right.
I would love to know
I got
where.
a question on the.
Oh, wait a minute.
I got a question on the Razorback model itself. Republic made the Razorback, and also it was licensed built by Curtiss, the P-47G.
Right.
How many of the Republic built are still in existence? And is there any fundamental difference between the D model Razorback and the Curtiss built G model?
I bet Chuck knows the answer to
This
that.
is the only flying. This is, and you have to be kind of specific because people always argue, oh, there's two other Razorbacks. There's two Razorbacks that are beautiful airplanes flying in California that were made by Curtiss, and they're G models. And Curtiss kind of got behind the ball, and by the time they were producing, Republic had moved up a couple more marks and had more performance and so forth. So the G models never left the United States, and that's why those two exist. This is the only Republic-built D model Razorback flying in the world.
Okay, answers that question. Next, there we go, upper left.
I have a question for Jerry. Jerry, where were you fighting in Europe? And where did you fly out of?
In Italy and the Balkans. And it was on the Adriatic side. But it may be of interest to all of you that after the war, we all expected they were going to be sent home. But we weren't. We were sent to Linz, Austria, which was a now German airport that was given up after the war. And the reason we went to Linz, Austria was that the people in government in the United States was sure that our fighter group was going to be the only area that would repel the Russians when the third war starts. And that's the history of the group.
Wow.
Interesting.
Wow. All right, another question. There we go.
What are you burning for fuel in this one now?
100 low lead.
Do you have to derate the engine for that?
Yeah, we don't run rated what is rated takeoff power anymore. It would be 51 inches dry. We use 45.
What were they using during the war? What was the octane?
115, 145.
Okay. Okay. All right, another question.
Thank you for the family. Thanks for representing all the World War II veteran survivors. But I think it would be illustrative in this group, since it's we the people, how many survivors we have, like the two daughters here, whose fathers, not just the grandfathers, we could do that next, but fathers flew these in World War II.
Yeah,
yeah.
There's one. Oh, yep, one right there. Thank you. Another one over there. Here we go. We got more. That's pretty incredible. Thank you for that question. All right, another one. Go ahead.
Question over here is, will we see this airplane fly this week?
Yeah.
Bernie? Yeah.
Bernie, you still here? Yeah.
I was sleeping, sorry. What do you say?
Will
yeah,
we
we did have a little bit of a maintenance issue. We're gonna test fly it hopefully this afternoon during the air show.
Okay, wonderful. And if you all get a chance, come take a close walk around this airplane. I happened to see it while the EA judges were combing it the other day, and so I had the opportunity to look at it up close and personal. And I'll compliment Air Corps. It is spectacular. I mean, the rivets, you name it, everything is precise. I gotta say.
And
another outstanding job.
I'm gonna second that and plug Air Corps a little bit. I think this is the fifth, I don't know, a few airplanes now. And particularly for me, this is like the fourth airplane I've test flown from either being brand new or rebuilt, new engine, something coming out of other shops, major restoration stuff, and it's pretty much perfect. We had a really good test flight program. They all have hiccups, but that crew goes above and beyond to make sure that it's 100% and it works. It's right before I get in it, before anybody gets in it. And we had a little maintenance issue this week, and my hat's off to them. They spent almost all of yesterday not only getting it here judged, looked at, loaded, cleaned, everything, but then they had to spend all day yesterday trying to fix our hiccup, and it was literally like the 11th hour. We got it out this morning and taxied over here. So just want to say thank you.
And I'll just say that I overheard a conversation with Air Corps, and the one thing they said was there's a bunch of priorities in terms of getting these airplanes flying again, and you'll be glad to hear that the first priority is your butt. Okay, so they want to make sure that butt gets down here again, and that's the way it should be. So I thank Air Corps for that.
My wife appreciates that, by the way.
All right, got a question up here.
I just want to thank you again for bringing this plane back. My dad flew with the 404th Fighter Group in Europe, and I just sent 2 pictures of this to a gentleman named Floyd Blair who lives in Ocala, Florida. I met him face to face this spring. He flew with my dad, and I sent him the pictures, and he said his airplane was never that clean.
All right, we got a question over here on the right.
How soon after restoration did you fly it, and where will this be kept?
We flew it like literally the day the paperwork was finished and a restoration isn't just getting all the parts together to make that. You still have to go to the FAA, still have to get registration. If you want to talk about hurdles for an airplane, we kind of had a lot of them. They won't register an airplane until it's an airplane. Well, we couldn't do any of the registration paperwork, so we got all done, and we went to registration. Well, there was this little thing called COVID, and nobody works anymore. They all are remote, so we had to go through the hurdles of that, and so it was done for a long time, but we were faced with paperwork issues, and then it has to get a stamp from a person that says it can fly and it is airworthy. So we got that, and it was the same day we started the flight test, and everything clicked. We had to fly a certain amount of hours off of it before you could leave a general area, so we had to fly it around Bemidji for 10 hours, and then we could take it to the paint shop, and it was just, everything clicked, and we weren't doing this just once. We were doing this for both airplanes that were in Warbirds in review today. Yeah. This cool aluminum big giant beast and that shiny blue silver bullet over there. So they were doing it and it was just back to back. We test fly this airplane, go get that one. They literally drove the airplane on a trailer from the shop, a wing and a fuselage for Thunderbird while I was test flying this. I show up and here comes Mark Tisler in a pickup truck with a Mustang behind him, like it was not a big deal.
There's one thing that I'd like to add about that is that this plane is going to reside at the Dakota Territory Air Museum up in Minot, North Dakota. And I just want to say that the Dakota Territory Air Museum is really, in the last number of years, has really stepped forward in a big way in hosting all of our planes and having an incredible collection of vintage airplanes. And under the direction of Warren Peach and his crew, it's a real, even though it's up in Minot, it's well worth a visit. It's an incredible place, and they have done a phenomenal job in hosting all of these Warbirds.
And it's not just Warbirds. There's everything
vintage,
from preteen airplanes to obviously this brand new thing will be there.
Yeah.
But it's a museum well worth going to if you like airplanes. There's a little bit of everything.
But you should call ahead if there's any particular plane you want to see, because it may not be there, because we have a commitment to flying these and sharing them with people. These are not hangar queens.
Yeah.
This
Thankfully,
thing is
Bruce
fly.
allows us to keep them going.
Yeah.
And they build the airplanes with the intent on them flying.
Yeah.
They're not just going to get pushed out and run and then pushed back inside.
Yeah.
All right, we got a little guy. Oh, we got the big guy. I saw the little guy first.
I was just wondering if you could comment upon the elliptical wing, what it did for.
The elliptical wing.
It's pretty.
Well, Spitfire had one too, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
It's prettier.
Yeah.
It is. But yeah, I can't speak to that.
Yeah, I'm sure somebody out here could explain the physics behind it. I just go like this. It could be square, it could be round.
Yeah, sorry. No good answer. Now we got the little guy over there. Go ahead.
How long ago did you finish this project?
2 months.
About a month and a half ago,
Yeah.
it flew for the first time.
Okay, outstanding. And we're glad you did finish it, and glad that you were here. All right.
Yeah, these poor guys are going to need a vacation.
Yeah.
Go ahead. One more.
Good afternoon. I don't have a question so much as a comment. I had the opportunity to pick up Jerry, and he jumped into the Jeep as though he was a young, spry man, and we had the opportunity to get him in the aircraft, and he's not 99. I swear he's 20. He got up in that cockpit without missing a beat.
Yeah. You didn't leave the keys in the airplane, did you?
Yeah,
I'm worried that, he'd probably crank that thing up.
Yeah.
Well, all right, any more? Oh, one more at the top.
My father hated flying the 47 because he said the turbo lag was so bad. And I wonder if you could adjust, any comment on that?
Well, the way they flew them, so there's a whole bunch of levers over here. A normal airplane has a throttle, a prop, and a mixture. This thing has a blower lever, supercharger, the turbo in the back, the throttle, the prop, and the mixture. And there's actually a way through some linkage on the actual levers that they would lock them all together, and it was automagic. You just ran the throttle, and the propeller went up with it, came back with it, the turbo came up, went back. Well, it's an oil-controlled butterfly valve that's got to do this. And I'm sure there was some turbo lag when they were up really high, because they, like these things, they go click, and it's instant power. Those things, they go click and the burner turns on and they have instant acceleration, but you had to build up power in this, so.
Okay, I'm going to say thank you to everybody involved here. Bruce, I say thank you.
Thank you.
Margot, Shelley, Chuck, Bernie, the two Erics, and most importantly, and I'd like to finish, first of all, veterans. I want to see how many veterans we got in the crowd today. I do this on every performance. Please stand up if you're a veteran. Thank you for your service. And the last thank you I want to deliver to this gentleman right here and say, Jerry, thank you. Thank you for our freedom. Thank you for what you did. Thank you for being part of the greatest generation. So with that, I'll say, well done. And I hope you can come back next year.
Are they able to come down for questions?
Yeah, if you want to come down for questions or whatever, come on down. And yeah, these guys will be here to answer specifics if you want.